Welcome to another deep dive. Today we'll be looking at something I think you'll find pretty interesting: Islam and fine arts. The source material for this deep dive is going to be Islam and Fine Arts by Dr. Mohammad Emarah.
Sounds fascinating.
Yeah. I think a lot of people, when they hear this topic,
hmm
might think that those two kind of clash,
hmm
but I think that's one of the things we'll be looking at.
I think that's a common assumption, but the book really does a great job of breaking that down. It really argues that Islam actually embraces artistic expression, as long as, it aligns with its values.
So I guess my first question then is, what kind of art are we talking about here?
Yeah.
I mean, is it like religious art or something else?
I think it's a bit of both. You have things that you might expect, like the architecture of mosques, the domes, the way they use light.
I've always loved how peaceful and beautiful mosques are, the way the light comes in through the stained glass and the patterns. It's really captivating.
It really is. And the book talks about how those patterns, the geometric patterns especially, are meant to evoke a sense of awe, connecting you to something bigger than yourself.
So it's not just decoration, it's intentional.
Exactly. Take the Giri tiles, for example.
Yeah.
Those incredibly complex geometric patterns, they represent like the infinite nature of the divine.
Eerie tiles.
Yeah, they're amazing. They use just a few shapes, like stars and polygons, but they can be combined in so many ways. And they've been used in Islamic architecture for a long time, centuries even.
Wow, so they're both beautiful and mathematically sophisticated.
Right, and they have that deep spiritual meaning too.
And that's just one example, right?
Yeah, there's so much more to Islamic art. Calligraphy is another key element.
The art of beautiful writing.
Right. But in Islamic tradition, it's more than just pretty handwriting. It's really about the power of the word, especially the Quran.
So it's almost a sacred art form.
Exactly. The Arabic script itself, the way it's used to convey the divine message, is seen as both art and worship. And you see it everywhere: mosques, manuscripts, everyday objects, bringing beauty and spirituality into every aspect of life.
That's so different from how we view art in the West. It seems like the focus here is on individual expression, pushing boundaries.
Yeah, that's a good point. In Islamic art, it's often about channeling creativity within a framework of religious principles.
So it's more about expressing spirituality through art, connecting with the divine.
Yes, the book really emphasizes this. Art in Islam is a reflection of God's creation. It's a reminder of God's greatness and a way to connect with the divine, and also a tool for moral and spiritual education.
It's amazing to see how intertwined art and spirituality are in Islamic thought. It makes me really rethink what art can be, what it can achieve.
That's the beauty of exploring different cultures and perspectives, right? It really challenges our preconceptions and opens up these new worlds.
It's really fascinating to see how much depth there is to Islamic art. Like, it's not just about aesthetics. There's a whole philosophy behind it.
Oh, absolutely. And I think as we kind of dig a little deeper, we'll start to see how important the historical context is for understanding all of these nuances.
Yeah, that makes sense. Like any art form, I guess. You can't fully appreciate it without understanding where it came from.
Exactly. And the book talks about this with the Alhambra Palace in Spain, which is just a breathtaking example of Islamic architecture.
Oh, yeah. I've seen pictures. It's incredible.
Right. But when you think about the historical context, it was built during Muslim rule in Spain, so there was a lot of cultural exchange happening between Islamic and European traditions. And you can really see that reflected in the art and architecture.
So it's not just an Islamic building. It's a product of this.
Yeah.
Like fusion of different cultures.
Yeah, a fusion of styles and ideas. And you can see that in the patterns, the designs. It's really a reminder of how these different cultures came together, shaped that whole region.
So we shouldn't just label it as Islamic art. We should recognize the broader cultural context.
Exactly. And this idea of cultural interplay is key to understanding how Islamic art developed over time. Another good example is the Mughal Empire in India, Mughal art. It blends Islamic aesthetics with traditional Indian elements, creating this really unique and rich tradition.
Like the Taj Mahal.
Right.
Absolutely. That's a perfect example. It combines Islamic architectural elements with influences from Hindu and Persian art.
Yeah. And speaking of the Taj Mahal, it's also a great example of how calligraphy is used in Islamic art.
Oh, yeah. The Taj Mahal is covered in these intricate inscriptions from the Quran.
So it's not just decorative. It has a deeper spiritual meaning.
Right. And we talked earlier about how calligraphy isn't just about aesthetics in Islamic art. It often serves a specific purpose.
Like education or moral guidance.
That's right. The book mentions how calligraphy is often used to convey Islamic values and teachings.
So it's not just art for art's sake. It's about using art to communicate these important principles. Yeah. For example, You might see in a mosque a calligraphic panel with verses from the Quran that emphasize, like compassion or generosity, or even the pursuit of knowledge.
So it's almost like the artwork is encouraging you to reflect on these ideas.
Exactly. And this idea of art having this kind of didactic purpose goes way back to the early days of Islam. The Prophet Muhammad himself encouraged people to use art, to beautify their homes and create a peaceful atmosphere, because he believed that beauty could help people grow spiritually and morally.
That's interesting. So art was seen as integral to everyday life.
Yes, and it still is today. You see Islamic art in mosques and homes and schools, inspiring people and connecting them to their faith.
You know, talking about this,
Yeah.
it makes me realize that my own view of art is kind of limited. Like, I think of it as something separate from daily life. You go to a museum to look at art.
Yeah, I think that's a common way of thinking about it, especially in the West. But Islamic art kind of challenges that separation. It's about integrating art into life, using it to connect with something greater.
This is really making me rethink my whole perspective on art. What about you? Has anything stood out to you as we've been talking?
I think for me, it's just this reminder that art can be such a powerful tool for teaching, for communicating values, for connecting with spirituality. It's not just about looks, it's about how it shapes our understanding of the world.
That's a great point. It makes you appreciate the intentionality behind Islamic art. And speaking of intentionality, I know there are different interpretations within Islam about the role of art, and even some debates about the boundaries of art. Is that something we're going to get into next?
Yeah, I'm really curious to hear more about that, these different interpretations, the debates about the role of art in Islam.
Well, the book definitely acknowledges these different perspectives, but actually argues that this kind of variety of thought is actually a strength.
That's strength. How so?
Well, it shows that Islamic tradition isn't static.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's a living tradition where people are constantly thinking critically, engaging in these debates. It's a sign of intellectual vitality.
So it's not like there's one right answer. Exactly. It's more like a conversation,
Yeah.
an ongoing discussion among scholars and artists who are trying to understand these complex issues.
And what are some of the things they're debating?
Well, one of the big ones is the depiction of living beings in art. We talked a bit about this before, like how God and the prophets shouldn't be depicted.
Right.
But the discussion goes beyond that. It also includes things like animals and humans.
So there's more nuance there.
Yeah, some scholars believe that any depiction of a living being, it could be problematic, it might lead to idolatry or distract from the worship of God.
That makes sense.
But others argue that as long as the intention is pure and the image isn't being worshipped, it could be okay.
So it's about finding that balance
Hmm.
between respecting the spiritual essence of Islam and allowing for creativity.
Exactly. And this tension has actually led to some really creative solutions throughout Islamic art history. For example, in Persian miniature painting, they depict human figures in these beautiful, elaborate scenes.
But how do they do that without violating those principles?
Well, they often use stylization and abstraction, like they might paint faces in profile, or make the figures elongated, or decorate them with intricate patterns.
So it's not about being completely realistic. It's more about capturing the essence of the person.
Right. And it shows how Islamic artists have always grappled with these questions, finding ways to express their faith through art while still staying true to their principles.
That's really fascinating.
And there are other areas where these debates come up too, like the use of music in Islam. There are different opinions on that.
Yeah, I remember the book mentioned that the Prophet Muhammad actually enjoyed listening to singing.
That's right. But some scholars see certain types of music as a distraction from religious devotion, while others believe music, especially devotional music like Sufi chanting, can actually enhance spirituality.
So again, it's about context and intention.
Exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all answer. It's about understanding the spirit behind these interpretations and recognizing that beauty and art can be powerful ways to connect with the divine.
This whole deep dive has been so eye-opening. I feel like we've gone from thinking that Islam and art might clash to seeing how deeply intertwined they really are.
It really is amazing to see how art can be used to express spirituality, to teach, to inspire, and to connect with something larger than ourselves.
And I love how this deep dive challenged us to really think about these questions and maybe even rethink our own assumptions about art and spirituality. So before we go, I want to leave our listeners with something to think about. We've seen how Islamic art uses things like patterns and calligraphy to bridge the gap between the spiritual and the tangible. So what other ways can we build those kinds of bridges in our own lives? How can we explore that connection between spirituality and artistic expression, no matter what our beliefs are? It's a question worth pondering, I think, as we continue to engage with art in all its forms.